Hello and welcome to the next session of our nice exterior desert environment here. So last time we did like a really straightforward basic setup, and we can look at this and it's kind of like okay-ish, but still it's a bit simple and all of that. So one of the first things that I want to do now is I want to work a little bit more with the actual atmosphere here. And last time we added the height fog, which emulates a little bit this kind of like dustiness, but again, it is not really what gives us the proper atmosphere. And I guess you may have noticed that I so far did not use the sky atmosphere, because the sky atmosphere, it is used together with like the volumetric clouds and all that kind of stuff. And while it is really cool, especially if you want to have like time of day or stuff like that, I do sometimes really prefer having the control with like a static image. Like it gives me a lot more control and also a lot more realistic look with the cloudscapes and all these kinds of things. So what I want to do next is I want to actually turn off our exponential height fog here, for now at least. So we turn this off. And also what you just saw here, like I can't stress it enough, but it is rather important, which is like sometimes you think that your stuff is not readable enough, and then you might make it too bright, and then you add like the fog, and like the fog just increases the layering and the readability. So it is not always maybe the ideal way to combat these things with just like adding more lighting per se. So yeah, generally speaking, it can just like really help a lot to work with proper fog here. So let's turn this one off. And now we have our atmospheric fog here, which at the moment is turned off. And generally speaking, the atmospheric fog is not designed necessarily to work with a static sky sphere, because like if we just look at this, of course there's like some background stuff here, but here you can see we do like this. What we see in the texture is basically the atmospheric scattering over distance. So we like get like particles in the air occluding the clouds here and all these kind of things. And this is stuff that the atmospheric fog does as well. So we need to be a bit careful when we try to blend them together. So I can turn this on and you can instantly see how it does affect everything, and how it also sort of like almost like takes a bit away from the sky. So we definitely lose some intensity here in our values. However, we do gain some way better layering when looking at the distance and how we just get the mountains in the back blending in. I am a little bit surprised, I have to say, because like I don't use the atmospheric fog like a lot, but I do think this is a very interesting shift here in color intensity nevertheless. So what we also need to make sure is that when we look at our directional light, we definitely want that it's set to being an atmosphere sunlight. Because if we don't have that, it's like the fog is basically not really doing anything. So like even if we look in the back over here, it's like when I turn this off, it is like the fog is basically invisible. So we definitely want this to be on. And then with these settings here, so these are rather interesting. So first of all, a lot of these settings are very, let's say, scientific in a certain way. So it is not really that smart to go completely haywire with them. I mean, you can use them if you like want to emulate the atmosphere of Mars, let's say. Then you can change settings, you can change the planetary radius, like a lot of these things. But you know, like it's not always what you what you kind of want to do. So we got to be a bit careful with these settings. So I have mentioned it already, but I have to admit I'm not a super huge pro with the atmospheric fog, because I again, like I said, I usually don't use it much. I have used it in the past, many years ago, when like these days I don't work with Unreal anymore for professional work, but I used to work in Unreal for professional work, and I used it back then. So I am a little bit rusty, but I think it's also fun to like explore these things together. So first of all, I think that we can actually use this potentially to see if we can limit our effect here, where you can see how we cover the sky and we still like see it back in the mountains there. So our default value here is 60. So let's try 25. We're still having a lot of sky. Let's try 10. Still a lot of sky. 5. Now it's getting better. 3. Better. 2. Better. So now we actually restored some of the sky while we still have our nice like distance rendering there. And this is kind of like something that I like doing, because like it will give me back some of my sky values, because we just lowered the thickness of the atmosphere. So you can see when I turn it on and off, the change is not as drastic anymore as before, but we still do get like the nice distance bluening desaturation effect, so to speak. So that is definitely something that we can do and use to our advantage. So something else that we can actually try is, here we have a ground albedo, which is set to gray. And that might not actually be the best way to set this. So what we can try is we can go into our buffer visualization here. And let's go in here and let's just color pick something like this here. So now we have this value. And it does not have a super huge impact here. Why can I not? Okay. Sometimes this is weird. It doesn't work the same, like you can't redo some of the things. But again, it's not a big change that we got here, but I just like to set it. All right. So let's tweak this a bit further. This is not of importance to us right now. So here are a bunch of really interesting settings. So we can just like fool around with them. I wouldn't really change the color of the Rayleigh scattering, because this is, as we can see, what gives the atmosphere the color. But we can, as you see, we can like thicken this. And like the more scattering we have, like the more almost like post-apocalyptic this starts feeling. And also one interesting thing is, since we have set our sunlight to affect this, we can actually see that our sunlight is changing color as well. So it is basically they work together, because we have so much scattering inside the atmosphere now. So this is kind of like what you can potentially do when you want to get like a sandstorm or something. And let's actually try if the color here is affected by this. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this value and we're going to change this. And we can see it did change a little bit here, right? So if I paste that back in, we can definitely see how this affects the scattering inside the atmosphere. And this is very interesting because when people want to do things like sandstorms or like some really dusty environment and things like that, they quite often, like for example, go really mental in the height fog. But that is actually the wrong way to do, because the height fog per se is a completely fake technique that is sort of like additive on top of the scene. But then there's, of course, the volumetrics. But the volumetrics is just like a more, how can I say it, like a more up-close representation of some of these effects. But when like the wind really blows and it blows up all the dust into the atmosphere, this is what you actually get. So it makes a lot of sense. Oh, this is fun. Sorry. Yes. Okay. So it actually makes a lot of sense to... I reset this. God damn it. It makes a lot of sense to like fool around with these values and see what you can actually get here. I need to look if I want to put this to 2. Yeah, I do want to do that. So again, it's absolutely fine to experiment with these. Then we have the Mie scattering here. So, and if we increase this, we get this sort of like really strong scattering from the sun direction. And we can also see that it does thicken the atmosphere a bit, right? So if I do this like really strongly, we get overcast. And it's beautiful here as well because like you can see how this completely kills the shadows and everything. So we just basically generated overcast by having loads and loads of particles here inside our atmosphere. And if I remember correctly, Mie scattering is water droplets, while Rayleigh scattering is more like dust particles and stuff like that. So we can clearly see that this looks a lot more like water droplets or something like that. And the cool thing is that we can, of course, I'm just going to turn the fog back on quickly here. So, you know, we can emphasize this effect, and then we can turn on the volumetric fog. And for the volumetric fog, now we can see that we kind of like have not really a lot up close here. So we could potentially go into our volumetric fog and start really cranking some of this so you can see how we get a lot more here now. And it is a little bit blue because it still scatters some from the sky. So we can do something like this, right? Which starts to become really eerie and pretty cool. We do have a bit of the wrong sky texture for stuff like this though. But just saying that if we would now add some cool light here, we would need to crank this light a lot because we have this daytime setting right now with like a very, so like basically our exposure and everything does not match this environment right now. We would need to have a lot lower exposure to actually make this work properly. So I'm gonna go with lumens right now, and I'm just gonna set something like 15,000, 50,000, or 500,000, fine. So you can see that we get some really nice like scattering here. So if we just like put this like somewhere here, And again, like I'm just like quickly fooling around here. This is not really representative of where this is going. So we could just like scale this up a bit. And then make this warm. And then we can go into our volumetric scattering as well and just like so like, you know, you could like do some pretty cool stuff like this where you can quickly establish a mood. So let's get rid of this. Let's go into our atmospheric fog. Or first, actually, let's reset this. Turn this off. So here we had our Mie scattering. And then, of course, for artistic purposes, you can do all sorts of things. But this one is funny. So this here is actually not a color picker. Well, it is technically speaking, but you can see that these colors do not represent the look that we're getting. And the reason for that is that this is like some like wavelength stuff here. So it doesn't actually mean that these are the color values that are being like scattered in that sense. So it is a bit like, you know, these values are more interpreted in a scientific way and less of in an artist kind of way. So let's go back here. We also have absorption scale, which usually is not that useful. I mean, maybe it is if you want to make like some kind of like horror game where like some mythical power sucks the light out of everything or something. I don't know. But usually absorption scale, not that intensely useful, I would say. Actually, I assume that if we do this and then we touch this one, it is probably going to be, yeah, the same thing again. It's like the colors work similar to the scattering, where it's more like a scientific way of interpreting these. I haven't really... Oh yeah, this is kind of like where the sun comes from. So it's like, you can see it like scatters more in. So you can tweak that here. Atmosphere absorption scale. Honestly, no idea what that one does. And I don't even see like a lot of differences. But that could also be because we already tweaked our atmosphere height here. So... And then we have some art direction parameters here. So we can change some of the sky colors here. We don't see a lot of this right now. We see it maybe a bit like in the back here, because this is kind of like really the atmosphere. So now we're like blocking it because of the sky sphere that we're having here. So if I go here and I turn that off, right? Like this is the atmosphere that we're like rendering right now. So you can see like there's a lot of lack of blue here, and that is because I dropped the height so much. So if I would put the height back up, there would be a lot more. So here you can sort of like art direct the sky and give it like different colors and stuff. Here we can sort of like increase or decrease a little bit of the fogginess. So, and again, these also are not physically like accurate. These are more like artist tweak parameters. Which one is the good one? This one. And I'm obviously tweaking these now with our sky visible because I want to make sure that we get something that blends well. I don't really care too much about how it works with the proper sky, like with the proper physical sky. That is actually not so much a concern for me right now. So we can look at this here, and I kind of do like a value that is maybe like 2, just like a tiny little bit of fill here. No idea. Yeah, okay. Okay, so we can remove it a bit from the foreground, which will make our sky more visible, but we still maintain it in the background here. I think something like this works quite well. So if we do this now, we can see this does a decent job here. So now the question is, of course, do we still want to touch some of these values here? So for example, do we want to touch a bit of the Rayleigh scattering? But it's almost like really touching the colors like too much. Like, so I don't want to do this. This is not like Mars. So maybe we just want to do this. That made almost no difference. It's just like a tiny little bit here. And then, of course, we gonna bring back this guy. So, and now we have made this like incredibly washed out and dusty. And that could be absolutely something that we would like to do. So that is one way. And let's look at our post volume here and see if we also may want to adjust the exposure here slightly. This is not too bad. And let's go to our fog again. So now I want to look at this one again here. And I want to turn it a little bit more towards the red. And let's see if I saturate this a tiny little bit more. So now we still have the density, but it's a little bit less washed out. So I actually do like this quite a bit. So now one important thing that we kind of lost a bit, because like if I'm gonna go in here and turn this off, oh, this is actually nice. So now, since we removed the thickness of the atmosphere, we actually do maintain a little bit of the colors here. But one thing that I'm not particularly sure about when I look at this in lighting only, so we can see that our shadows are actually quite blue, obviously, because here it's a bit different, because we quite like get a lot of bounce lighting and so on. So here we can also again see like there's a lot of warm bounce lighting. But in here, the shadows are quite cool, which is pretty great. But we don't see too much of it. So, like, one thing that we could do now is we could go into our skylight in here. And what we can do is we can decide if we want to do some artist tweaks now. Because like this is basically a good general setup that we have, but we can also decide like, hey, you know, I kind of feel like I want to do some more artistic tweaks on some of the things here. So let's see if we like that more. So that is always something that I feel like It is not necessary, but you can always try and see if you do like something a little bit more. Because again, this is not the real world. It's like we want to get close to it, but like sometimes it just makes sense to emphasize some things because it helps the brain a bit in a way of it's sort of like seen from that perspective, if that makes sense. So I am just adding a bit of blue here to my skylight. And if we look at this, for example, I'm going to copy this quickly. So here we have it like really warm. And here we made it a bit cooler. And I think it sometimes can help to do that. Nice. And sometimes it can also help, if you want that, to flatten the contrast a little bit. So, because I don't want to make the sky brighter because I love that it's like so blue. So you can sometimes increase this a little bit, but I would always say like really don't do much more than 2, because you don't want to decouple the indirect lighting from this the sky brightness too much. That is one of the reasons why I use this capture method where I capture the actual sky dome here, because I just think like that way they are well connected and balanced and it makes a lot of sense. But sometimes I also feel like, yeah, maybe I would like to have just a little bit more. And then this can really help. So now one thing that we can see here, and that is something that I feel like a lot of people often like forget, or they just like potentially don't like think about it in that way. And this is kind of like, so when I look at this, I think that something looks really off. Now you may ask yourself, well, what is that? And that is something where, for me at least, I say that teaching your brain how to see is very, very important. And one thing that I see is there's quite a lot of clouds in my sky. So what happens when there is a sun and there's clouds? Well, you end up with cloud shadows. And we can clearly see that we don't really have any cloud shadows here. So everything is kind of like naked and empty. What we can also see, I think, that is at least from my point of view, this one still doesn't blend in too well. So we'll have to give this a look. But for now, let's do some cloud shadows. And the way to do this is you can either use the sky atmosphere system and volumetric clouds and then use that, or we can use a feature that we haven't looked at all so far, but I think it's one of the coolest features inside of Unreal, and it is supported for pretty much all light types, but it behaves differently based on what type of light it is. So if you have a point light, it works different than when you have like a spotlight, a rectangular light, or a directional light. It is not supported for skylights, but it doesn't make any sense to do so, and you'll understand in a second why. So the feature that I'm talking about can be found down here, and it's called a light function. And a light function is basically a material that has a black and white texture that, imagine you like you cut out a paper and you put it in front of a flashlight and then it casts a shadow in that shape. So that is basically what a light function does. So what we can do is, just trying to find my lighting folder here. So what we can do is we can just create a new material, Cloud Shadows 01. So we're going to open this. Here we have it. And then luckily the content that this scene here, it comes with a bunch of utility textures. So we can see there's a bunch of like generic noises and stuff like that. So I'm just gonna use these. Like this stuff, you can make this yourself in Photoshop using the clouds filter at different sizes and adding and multiplying them together and just stuff like that. And then like, you know, doing a bunch of level adjustments or whatever. So it's not really like black magic or anything. It's pretty straightforward. But for now, I'm just going to use what I have here. So let's build some very simple cloud shadows. So first of all, we're going to go into the material domain here. And if you don't have that, you may have selected something. Well, I don't have anything here. So like if you select the root or click the background, you get this. So here we're going to go to light function, and that makes it like this. So we have emissive color as the only input for now, which is great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this texture here, and then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to take this texture here, and I will basically modulate them against each other. And one important thing is like you can make these cloud shadows so that they're like animated and they move. I don't want to do it this time around. Like right now, I just want to orchestrate it more in a way where I'm kind of like, yeah, this is what I want. So I don't want these to like change all the time, move around. But there's like it's no problem to do any of that. So we need some texture coordinates. Then we gonna add some multiplies. And then we have cloud 01 scale. Let's just put this to 1. And I'm going to call this texture cloud so I understand it better. And the other texture, I'm actually going to call it just noise. And now, while I'm thinking, I actually think let's do this differently. Let's do world position, and then we take a component mask, we mask RG, which means red and green channel, which is the same as like U and V in that sense. And then we actually use divide. It's like for world scale, for like big stuff, this is a little bit better, in my opinion. Let's do it like this. Whoop. So we're gonna put this in here and this in here. So let's start like previewing / debugging this a little bit. So first of all, let's just gonna plug this number 1 thing in here. And this looks pretty borked. And this is because it's like super small. But that does not concern us right now. So just gonna add this here. All right. So, and now we can see it only made it darker. And the reason for that is because it's like so small, there it is. So it's basically just like leaving no real room here. It's basically just like it was gray. But it doesn't really matter because we just can go in here and just like increase the scale. All right? So now I'm just like increasing the scale off screen here. And this is kind of cool. Like, this is like really really kind of cool to create these pockets, and it like blends well with the shadows and everything. So this is actually really, really cool as a general thing. So, but now we kind of have this, and it's a little bit like kind of still too generic and repeating, and also it's almost like the pockets are too small. Like it almost seems like it would need to be inverted. So one thing that we can do is we can use 1 minus, and we can actually just invert it. So that's like one thing that we can do. So we use this, and I'm gonna move this away, and now if I hit save, we should get a shadow here. Exactly. So now we kind of have this, and it does already like look more like what we had here. So now I'm thinking though, should we maybe change this a little bit, kind of like this? So I think this is not too bad. However, we can still see that it's like, yeah, maybe like here up close, this is kind of like cool, but it does not look too great when we look at the distance here. So what we can do is we can see if we can actually do something cool with this texture here. So let's just add a add node. Let's add them together. And to be honest, I have no idea what's going to happen, but that's half of the fun. So nothing really has happened because our scale of the second texture is enormously small. So I'm gonna try and increase this, and now we can see what is actually happening here, right? So one thing that we could do now is I'm gonna try and remove the 1 minus, so we get like more coverage again, like this. So this is kind of cool here. And now what I'm gonna do is on the noise scale, let's see. So we can actually brighten a bunch of these things here with the noise that we have. So we can see it is not as dense, which is pretty cool if you look at it like this. So one thing that we probably should do here is we should probably add a saturate, which is sort of like a better version of clamp here. We don't want to completely bork this. However, let's add in a multiply here for our noise, so we can actually make the noise more intense. So, and we should definitely start with at least a 1. So let's save this. And now when I slide the noise intensity here, you can see that we actually start breaking this up quite a bit. However, I think we may wanna do something larger, kind of like this. So now we have created something that looks a lot more natural and has a lot more variation here. So this is actually kind of cool. So one thing that you may wonder now is, so okay, cool, so I like this, but like, now I have this big hole here, and maybe I want it different. So how can I do that? Like, how can I move this texture? And that is very easy. So we can just add like an add node here, and another add node here. So, and these are a vector2 values here, right? So what we can do is we just take the vector3 right now, and we add a component mask here, so there's no weird value hiccups in that sense. We're going to connect this to add. We're going to turn this into a parameter, and we just call it cloud offset. And now the cool thing is that if we move the R and G values, it gets added and it will offset these textures. So if I put this over here, you can see that it will... Did I not save this? So here, yeah, there we go. So here we can see now, right? I set this quite a lot. So if I just start sliding this a little bit, we can now orchestrate how we kind of want this to be. And we can move these into sort of like interesting areas here. So I kind of like having this here where we have this like little light pocket. I think this is actually quite neat. So this is a really, really good way of just like figuring out a bunch of really cool cloud things here. And also one thing that you can do, you can add a power in here. And I'm holding S for the parameter again, and then call it cloud power. And the default for power is 1, then it doesn't do anything. And values higher than 1 increase sort of the power / contrast. It's a bit different than contrast. And values lower than 1 will make it brighter. So if I lower this, we can see that the clouds disappear. And if I power this up, we'll get something more like this. And something like this is quite cool because you can see how it creates this like nice variety here with these like really cool light pockets. And I just want to move the clouds a bit more. So let's see if we kind of like this. I think that could be kind of cool. I want something where definitely, like, I want this to be in the light, like the gas station, but I also want to have something where I can really see something nice here. Yeah, maybe this is not too bad. Yeah. So this is like the thing, right? It's like always the balance of how do you want to do it? Yeah. So let's go with this for now. So we can see that this is actually like a really nice way of adding something. So this feels a lot more believable than, like, you can see. Oh, this does not work anymore. Interesting. So this adds a lot more realism to this whole area. And it's a quick way to make things look a lot more natural. And this is also something that, for example, on Star Wars, on Battlefield, we've done it so much. It's just really a very good way of adding believability and realism to your environment. So now I just want to fix this color back here because it starts really to like annoy me. And the quickest way to do this is to make this one here brighter. So let's try 4000. So maybe like this, and then pull this a tiny little bit because I don't want to have a sandstorm back there. So this is kind of good. All right. Actually, I'm just missing this because we do have the in-scattering here, and I think that this one here is actually also the in-scattering. No. Oh, it only works for with the texture, I guess. Yeah, they changed a bunch of things here. I remember. Okay, yeah. So yeah. We can still use this if we want to. So like these values, when they're black, it is made so that it works with the sky atmosphere. So since we don't have the sky atmosphere, let's do something like this. That's quite cool. So yeah. And now we can, as always, just like add a little camera actor here to do something cool where we can just see a little bit better what we actually have here. So it is still like, it is quite foggy. So of course we can slide that back down again. A bit more like this maybe. So now what I'm gonna do is, so here we can see the aspect ratio, and a lot of like film stuff has 2.3, like for like cinema stuff. So, you know, we can get like these really nice wide angled shots now, which is pretty cool. And And we probably want to go to cinematic, so everything is kind of like there. So yeah, we can start to get some really nice stuff like this. And this is starting to look quite good here. And one thing that I think is quite important, so when we work, I would never recommend to use cinematic because it kind of like, it's like it overrides LUT settings and stuff like that. So it can become quite expensive, but for nice screenshots and these type of things, you kind of want this all to be rendered out properly without any weirdness. So this is definitely a way to do it here. Kind of want to do my thing here, and we can see it on the clouds when I slide this. It just like adds this little oomph. I want to, of course, add just a tiny little bit of vignette here. And then we kind of like expose it more like this. We're gonna look at the bloom stuff later on in one of the next lessons. And then of course, where is it? My favorite here. We're gonna add a bit of grain, and we're gonna start with like a horrible amount of grain, so we can tweak it kind of like this. And then, you know me, I'll reduce it a little bit in the mid values. I will reduce it a little bit in the highs. And then I will scale down the whole thing to something like this. This looks good to me. And we go to our cinematic camera actor, and we actually go like this. Place the shot nicely. And then we make sure that we track that. We just focus on our car here, like this. Beautiful. And then we're gonna render out a high-res screenshot. And we can look at this and say, beautiful. This is a very good step in the right direction for our setup here. So with this one done, thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next lesson.